Chargers wide receiver Ladd McConkey is the biggest value in round one of your Superflex rookie drafts. We'll explain on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side. It is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we are taking a look at round one of your Superflex rookie drafts and finding the best and worst picks coming out of round one. Kate, who is the most undervalued player in round one of your drafts?
This should come as no surprise to our everydayers who have been following along in our pre and post draft coverage, because we've got to talk about Ladd McConkey, new wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, before the draft, we were all over Ladd McConkey. We loved his athleticism, his speed, his ability as a route runner really set him apart, despite the fact that, like, you look at his measurables, just under 6 foot tall, a little bit on the slender side at 186 pounds, but has true 4.3 speed. And I mean, again, I mentioned it, the excellence as a route runner. He can play all three wide receiver positions. He can play on the outside. He can play the slot. Like, he's got a lot of versatility to his game. And then, Marcus, we're going to go ahead and pair him with Justin Herbert, who, I mean, my Lord, did he have a lot of vacated targets? Now, if you're watching along with us on YouTube, you're going to find the list of Justin Herbert's most targeted wide receivers from the 2022 to 2023 seasons. Topping that list are Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Josh Palmer, Gerald Everett, Mike Williams, and you're going to notice a pattern here. A lot of those guys are not there. Like, they're just not on the roster anymore. No. So when we're looking at the pairing of a supreme route runner and pairing him with one of the best quarterbacks in the league, with a quarterback who's got a lot of vacated targets up for grabs, I'm not going to put it past him to earn a good chunk of those vacated targets here immediately as a rookie.
I'm trying to think of the last time we had let's call it Justin Herbert, an elite quarterback, because I think everybody would agree that he is, where you come in and you have a rookie, a second round pick that basically leads the team in targets and receptions. Oh, wait, we had one last year in the same division with Patrick Mahomes and Rashee Rice. Now, I think Ladd McConkey is a better prospect than Rashee Rice. But I am curious to see how it works out. I think Rashee Rice is maybe the upside here, and that's what you're hoping for right away. But do you believe that Ladd can have maybe more long-term value than Rashee Rice here? Because that's the thing. If you're going to use where's Ladd McConkey being drafted right now? He's the number 11, number 12 player. So at the very bottom of round one of your Superflex drafts, you got to believe that he has a chance to be a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. Do you think he can get there?
I do think he can get there. And again, the pairing with Justin Herbert is kind of just the cherry on top. But Ladd McConkey's game, I think, just offers fantasy managers so much. Over in the 2023 season, like, the stats never really popped off the page for Ladd McConkey there in Georgia's offense. You need to take his box score with, I think, a giant, massive grain of salt, because they were running a true pro-style offense that wasn't conducive to the kind of passing volume that you saw with other programs, right? And the primary receiving target on this team, it should come as no surprise, Brock Bowers. Ladd McConkey was essentially functioning as that team's wide receiver too. But when you look at the advanced metrics, 82nd percentile in PFF receiving grade, 90th percentile in separation percentage, which speaks so well to his ability as a route runner and his ability to create separation, not just by being fast, but with the finesse of his route running. Yards after the catch per reception, 50th percentile. That's probably the greatest weakness that you can point out. But I think all around his profile is so conducive, to a volume-based role that, like, let's say a la Rashi Rice, right? Like, it had a very low average depth of target coming out as a rookie, not necessarily the most conducive for maybe a overly efficient role unless you make up for that in a massive way in yards after the catch. I think, Ladd McConkey's skill set is going to translate to, more deep targets. I think that's going to translate to maybe the volume and efficiency production profile that's going to make him an ideal pick.
See, that's where I think I disagree with you a little bit. I think you're right. McConkey has the ability to be a deep threat as a receiver. I just don't know if he's going to be used that way for a couple of reasons. Like, we have routinely seen Justin Herbert be a quarterback that doesn't necessarily push the ball down the field despite having a really good arm and being a good deep ball thrower. He just I think it's not in
Is
his
any of that
DNA.
due to scheme, though? And in the way
It's
that they constructed this offense, I do think
it's
that
possible. Yes,
having Austin
absolutely.
Eckler on your team is both a blessing and a curse, because I think having that safety valve, you can get comfortable, like, tossing it out. And you know what? Also, like, the offensive line hasn't been the most conducive to
No.
letting plays develop down the field, which I think is probably necessitated a lot more of that usage of Austin Eckler in these short range targets behind the line of scrimmage. I think
Well,
Joe Alt was a good pick. I think it was a surprising pick for many, given their need at receiver. But the fact that they walked away with Joe Alt and Ladd McConkey, who I think was an easy first round selection, who happened to fall out, I just think, like, all things considered, I love the fit of Ladd McConkey. I love the prospect. I love the direction they're heading. I think that I I
well,
don't know.
let
I
me
know that Justin Herbert hasn't pushed it down the field, but it's not because he can't. I think there have been a lot. I think we're oversimplifying the conversation if we say that Justin Herbert just doesn't like throwing deep.
We should also mention, and this is to your point, like, Keenan Allen was the primary receiver in this offense, and Justin Herbert played with an older Keenan Allen who really couldn't threaten teams vertically. So your top two targets were guys that were basically at or behind the line of scrimmage weapons. I will say one of the things that makes me excited about Ladd is I think he's going to play most of his snaps in the slot. And we've seen that Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh, at least previously when they were together with the 49ers, peppered the slot receiver. And we know that Justin Herbert has no problem peppering a slot receiver because he did it with Keenan Allen. I think there's a good chance he's just your starting slot receiver from day one. He's the leading receiver on this team. Not all that different from when Rashi Rice was the leading receiver out of the slot for the Chiefs. I do think he's a value, though. At the end of round one with that, 111, 112, you can get the number one receiver with Justin Herbert. I think that's a very, very fair pick.
Yeah, I think barring, a disastrous turn to his rookie season or an injury, I don't think there's any way Ladd McConkey doesn't lead this team in targets here in
I
the
agree.
coming season. You even look at the targets that he could potentially be sending to the tight ends. I mean, Will Dissly, Hayden Hurst, none of these guys have been assets that have been proven as consistent weapons in the passing game. I think all of this, even though I think they're probably set for a relatively low volume passing attack, I do think all of the things that they're doing in terms of wanting to establish the run, shoring up their offensive line, I do think this could be a good thing
Yep.
for his consistency overall and some of that efficiency that we've been lacking, in terms of total upside for this offense.
All right, I want to discuss who I believe is the best value in round one of your Superflex drafts. And we also got some breaking news regarding this player in his team. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL. and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. It's a fantastic time to be a sports fan. The NBA playoffs have been absolutely incredible. You know that I'm rooting for the T-Wolves the rest of the way. That series with the Nuggets is going to be so much fun. Go bet on that one now. You can go bet on who's going to come out of the Western Conference, who's going to come out of the East, who's going to win the most valuable player at the end of the playoffs. And also go check out their NFL lines. They have win totals up, player props, so much more. So go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate. So I'm actually going to let you go first on this one. I want your thoughts here on Jonathon Brooks, who right now is being drafted about, I don't know, somewhere between the 9th and the 10th pick. We're going to go with the 10th pick in your Superflex rookie drafts. Wanted to add in before I let you go here. The Panthers signed Rashad Penny this morning, who has some experience with David Canales, their new head coach who worked with him in Seattle. Does that scare you at all about Jonathon Brooks, or does that make you even more excited?
I'm going to be honest. I think this is kind of a net neutral. I think this is a move that probably means a lot for Miles Sanders more so than it does for Jonathon Brooks or what the future of this offense is. Look, you're talking to a girl who loves Rashad Penny. When this man has been in a voluminous role, however infrequent it's been, especially due to his history of injuries and health concerns, like there has not been a time that you could truly rely on, Rashad Penny to take on a monstrous role. I don't think this impacts Jonathon Brooks a whole lot. I think great insurance policy, especially if you're considering if, Brooks needs a little bit of that ramp up time coming off of that torn ACL. I think it's a very plus move for the organization as a whole. Doesn't move the needle for Jonathon Brooks, but I came out of the draft kind of a little bit more excited about Trey Benson than just based on landing spot. Obviously, Trey Benson has to compete with James Conner, and Jonathon Brooks has really no competition. Now Chuba Hubbard and Rashad Penny, but like you're still coming away with this as all in hype train on Jonathon Brooks. What makes him such a value here in round 1 of Superflex rookie drafts?
So first and foremost, I agree with you on Trey Benson. Like I'm in on Trey, and I want to grab both of these running backs at the end of round 1 because I think that's where the value is. But for Jonathon Brooks, this is a team that didn't really have a running back need. I thought Chuba Hubbard played pretty well last year. They obviously signed Miles Sanders to a big deal last offseason. They traded up to go get Jonathon Brooks. They clearly like him, and they must believe that he can be a franchise type running back. Now, maybe that won't happen right away, but all signs do point to him being ready, Jonathon Brooks being ready for training camp. I'm sure they're going to ease him in a little bit, but I think for the most part, or at least for most people, you're talking about the top running back in this draft, and you're getting him after the top 9 selections. He's incredibly young. He was very productive. He's got the height, weight, speed that we want, and he's got the draft capital. Like you're talking about somebody who was a top 50 pick. I think as soon as he hits the field, Kate, we're going to be talking about like a top 12 dynasty running back. And usually in my Superflex drafts, I want to draft players whose arrow is going up, right? Like who I believe are going to become more valuable the more they play. I think Brooks here at the end of round 1 is a massive steal.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I mean, Marcus, you mentioned the upside of Jonathon Brooks, right? He's young. didn't get a ton of mileage on the tires, obviously has that torn ACL, but because he was playing behind Bijan Robinson, behind Roshan Johnson, doesn't have a ton of tread on the tires. I think a really underrated aspect of his game, which this is kind of where I'm going all in on Jonathon Brooks, is his ability as a receiver, his ability as a pass blocker, which I think that's going to get him on the field day one. And 94th percentile in PFF receiving grade, 76th percentile in yards per route run. I think all of this is going to be very conducive to a true 3-down role that like Trey Benson probably won't see until year 2.
Probably not.
The biggest question for me, though, is just like about the trajectory of the offense. Now, I think the Panthers have done a good, not great job at building around Bryce Young. Like, I think great for the consideration of what they had to work with, given draft capital that they traded away to acquire their franchise quarterback. But like, I think that's kind of like my just general biggest question for Jonathon Brooks. But I do think the point that you're kind of getting in on the ground level for Brooks, right? Because it wasn't a sexy landing spot.
No.
And if this offense is going to be trending up, which I think it couldn't have gotten much worse than last year, right? Like all signs point to Jonathon Brooks as, a 250 plus touch guy sooner rather than later.
And that's the thing for me, that if you're projecting forward a little bit, I think this offense is going to be a lot better. Is it going to be a top 10 offense? No, but it's not going to be a train wreck like it was last year. They made 2 huge signings on the offensive line this year in Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt. The amount of money that those 2 guards got was absolutely ridiculous. Those are huge upgrades in the middle of their offensive line. They added Deontay Johnson, so now they have an actual outside receiver that can create separation. We've got Jonathan Mingo in year 2. They traded up for Xavier Legette in round 1. Is that receiving core great? No, but it's so much better than what Bryce Young had last year. And I think Dave Canales is going to be a huge upgrade from what we had last year when it was Frank Wright calling plays, and then it was Thomas Brown, and then it was back to Frank Wright. Like, it was just a disaster
That
all
was
year
such a
long.
mess.
Yeah. And I have my doubts about how Jonathon Brooks is going to do early in the year, because I do think the Panthers are looking at this as a long-term play. So probably the first 7 weeks of the season, I don't know how much value he's going to get for you. But to me, he's somebody that I'm really interested to see how he performs in November and December. And then by 2025, Kate, I mean, I think Miles Sanders is going to be gone. Frankly, I think Sanders will be gone before week 1 this year. Chuba Hubbard will be gone. Rashad Penny's on a 1-year deal, and he can't stay healthy. Like, there is just a good chance that Jonathon Brooks, going into his age 22 season, is in line for 300 touches on an ascending offense. I want in.
Yeah, and I don't think we can overstate enough how lucky we are in this 2024 rookie draft class. Like, to be able to grab the RB1 in any given draft class at the end of the first round or toward the back end of the first round in your Dynasty Superflex drafts feels unheard of. And
Exactly.
for that to be the case, and I mean, even if you want to make the case for Trey Benson, which I've done a little bit here, I've been able to grab, both of these guys. I've seen Jonathon Brooks fall out of round 1 in a couple of my rookie drafts. I've seen Trey Benson fall to the middle of the second. Like, these guys are falling. And again, 250 plus touch guys sooner rather than later. I'm all in.
Sign me up. All right. We've been a little bit too positive. Let's talk about the round 1 pick in your Superflex drafts that you should not be making right now. We will explain next. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. You guys have already talked about that so many times before, but there's just so much good stuff in this game that we have to tell you about. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more that you win together, the more awesome prizes that you unlock. And there's so much to get, like unique stickers that you can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces that you can travel boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every single day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton of them include their own unique mini games, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing the biggest or the best and the worst picks in round one of your Superflex drafts. We love Ladd McConkey. We love Jonathon Brooks. We love Rome Odunze. But do we like him for fantasy, Kate?
This is where things get very interesting because obviously you come out of the 2024 NFL draft and you see that Rome Odunze is now tied to the top ranked quarterback who some might say is generational talent, freak arm talent. And now, like, I've never seen that kind of situation where you have that kind of pairing and a player loses value, but it is pretty darn understandable to see a lot of people walk away and have Rome Odunze just absolutely tumbling down draft boards. And a lot of that comes down to his value in terms of a immediate contributor on an offense with a very crowded group of playmakers. You have DJ Moore, who took on an increased role in the offense after being traded to the Bears, supporting Justin Fields. He functioned as that number one wide receiver. You bring in Keenan Allen, whose name of the game has been volume, even though he is on the older side. He's entering the final year of his contract. I want to say for those who needed immediate production, right? Like, it feels like a loss, but I'm not totally out on Rome because I think the long-term trajectory of him in this offense, like Keenan Allen, I don't think we can necessarily project as like a long-term fixture in this
No.
offense. If you needed immediate production, Rome to the Bears was as disastrous an outcome as you could have imagined, but he is going to be the wide receiver in that offense sooner rather than later. So, like, how much of a loss is this really when we're evaluating from a talent perspective?
Just to be clear, I want Rome on my fantasy teams and on my dynasty teams. Like, I love him. I love the prospect. I think he's an amazing player. And I agree. Like, he's going to be the alpha on this offense sooner rather than later. It's just how long is it going to be? I mean, even if he becomes the wide receiver one, DJ Moore is a baller, right? And DJ Moore had the best season of his career last year playing with Justin Fields and Tyson Bagent, right? Like, he is going to click. For me, I can't justify the number 5 overall pick, which is where he's being drafted in your Superflex leagues. I would much rather take a chance on Drake May and JJ McCarthy, who are going after him just because of the value of the quarterback. But it gets a little trickier when we get down to like Rome Odunze versus Brock Bowers. I can make a good debate either way there. Certainly would take him over Brian Thomas Jr. That one's not even a question. But as the 5th overall selection, I just think that's a little high for a receiver. I don't know how long I'm going to have to wait before you're an every week wide receiver 2 or better for me.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Now, how much does Keenan Allen specifically play into that argument for you?
None.
Not at all.
No.
Okay. So I think that's probably a more interesting point because I think a lot of people, when the Bears traded for Keenan Allen, assumed he was going to be perhaps the target leader here, even though he is aging. He's still, kind of maintained that role as the chain mover for the Chargers. And I think people kind of expected a lot of the same. Now, let's say the Bears are running a 2 wide receiver set. Is Rome on the field?
Yeah. I don't know if we can trust Keenan Allen to stay healthy. And even if he can, I'm not convinced that he's going to be a better option than Rome right away. I just think Rome is going to be a better fit with DJ Moore, better fit with Caleb Williams, and they're going to want their number 9 overall pick on the field. That Keenan Allen doesn't concern me that much right away. I'm also not drafting just for the first 6 or 7 games either of the season. But again, I just think the 5th overall pick is a little bit rich here.
I think 5th overall pick, it does feel rich. And if you asked me pre-draft, I would have said smash Rome at the 5th overall pick. But again, this is Superflex that we're considering. And I do think that, again, when you look at the quarterbacks, maybe not, you look at Drake May to the Patriots, you look at JJ McCarthy, who has been controversial in his own right. Like the pairings, maybe after Jane Daniels to the Commanders and Williams to the Bears, like they don't feel as ideal, and you don't feel as enticed to, like, we have to draft quarterbacks in the first 4 picks because of the wealth of talent elsewhere. But yeah, I think in this circumstance, especially if you need some like year 1 production, especially like a JJ McCarthy, I think could be, I think he's destined for a decently long career in the NFL. I
He's
just
set
see
up
him.
well. I mean, the
He's
coaching
set up
staff is
well. Like,
unbelievable. They've got weapons all over the place.
yeah, it's really hard to justify the idea of a wide receiver that I really like going ahead
Yep.
of a guy like JJ McCarthy
Just
specifically.
because there's a finite number of starting
Mhm.
quarterbacks that we can rely on every year. And I have a hard time believing JJ McCarthy is going to fail. And I think he's going to give you a little bit more as a runner than what Kirk Cousins ever did, bringing up his floor. So between Drake May and McCarthy, because of the positional value, because of the draft capital, give me those guys over Rome, who I love as a player.
Who
I'm
okay,
go ahead.
just for to kind of bookend this conversation, at what point in the first round, because he is a first round pick in Superflex, at what point, number 5 is too rich, at what point do you start to consider what players have to be off the board for you to
Se-
start?
7. 7 is where I consider him. So
All right,
after
how
the top
about
4 quarterbacks, and then after the top 2 receivers.
Jonathon Brooks? Would you prefer Jonathon Brooks or Rome Odunze? You just said
Probably
he was an undervalued pick, Marcus.
that one's close. That probably depends on my roster construction, but I think they should
Okay.
be. I think Bowers, Brooks, and Rome should all be drafted. Boom, boom, boom. And a lot of it just depends on what your team looks like and where you're at with your rebuild or where you're at contending right now.
Very fair.
All right, that is it for today's show. On tomorrow's show, we're going to look at round 2, which is incredibly interesting. Man, there's values all over this, all over the place, including our guy Trey Benson. I'm sure we'll bring him up tomorrow. So make sure you tune in for that. Go follow the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Bonjuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.